Venturing into the Fate franchise can be quite difficult. There are several novels, animes, games, even manga that spawned from the original visual novel released in 2004. As someone who was introduced to the franchise with Fate fucking Extella, I can assure you that doing a bit of research beforehand is almost necessary to help you understand this so-called Nesverse, as it isn't very intuitive from the get-go. Even worse when we add other type Moon franchises into the mix. To keep it simple, the most obvious starting points would be either Fate Zero or Fate Stay Night. Yeah, that one. Fate Zero was released after the original novel as a prequel, but spoiled several plot points from the original Fate Stay Night novel. It is a good standalone anime, but if you intend to get more into the franchise, you should watch it after the modern adaptations of Fate Stay Night. On the other hand, we have the original adaptation from 2006, which is dismissed by a lot of fans due to not being faithful to the source material.
It's awful. It's all fucking awful!
While it is based on the Fate route from the novel, it adds plot points and moments from the two remaining routes alongside new original scenes, so it gets really weird and confusing. A fun watch, for sure, but certainly not the best starting point for a newcomer. While we intend to review other products from the franchise, we will start with the ones that are easily available nowadays, like the ones that you might find while surfing on Netflix. So that brings us today to Fate Apocrypha.
Oh no!
Fate Apocrypha was originally intended as an MMO game with an unknown story. Concepts from this stage were shown in a book in June 11, but it didn't go past the planning stage. Less than 6 months later, it was announced that the project would be reworked into a series of light novels, penned by Yuichiro Higashide with illustrations by Konoe Ototsugu, which were serialized from 2012 to 2014, spanning 5 volumes. The anime adaptation has 25 episodes and it was aired from July to December in 2017. The setting of this Fate story is the following. There are 2 opposing factions, red and black, each one with 7 heroic spirits and masters. They fight for the chance of earning the Holy Grail, a powerful magical device which can grant any wish. Because there are twice as many servants, this one is called the Great Holy Grail War. To maintain order with so many powerful heroes in a single fight, a new class, Ruler, was designed to oversee the conflict and avoid involving innocent people.
There are several characters that we follow throughout the story, but the main lead of Fate Apocrypha is a nameless homunculus from the Black faction, who managed to escape from the laboratory where he was created and also has a strong desire to live. He is aided by the Rider of Black, but our nameless protagonist is killed very early during the show. To save him, Saber of Black sacrifices himself by giving his scar to the homunculus, inheriting some of his power. After his death, Ruler helps the homunculus escape from the war. Now, calling himself Sid to honor the death of his savior, he decides to stand up and fight for his own beliefs, even if the future only awaits countless fights and... Although Apocrypha spawned several fan-favorite characters, such as Jan, Mordred and Stolfo, the truth is, the anime isn't really that great. As a whole, Fate Apocrypha is painfully mediocre. It had an interesting setting and concept. With double the number of servants and 2 factions fighting each other, the number of possible interactions and plotlines that can be developed is increased exponentially, in theory. Sadly, the series doesn't capitalize on such gimmicks, and most of the time does not deliver what you would expect. Today we are going to explore some of the issues of the anime adaptation, while also highlighting the good points, although those are unfortunately few and far between. God damn it.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
One of the glaring issues with the show is its protagonist, Sieg. If you search internet discussions about his character, you will probably find words like boring, plain, 3/4-star FGO, and a piece of cardboard. Once you watch the show, it's easy to see why such words are being used to describe him. His motivations are not entirely clear and fluctuate unnaturally during the show's runtime, so he lacks a full character arc throughout the series. His initial desire is to simply live, which is fine considering he was an homunculus who escaped the laboratory where he was going to be used as a living battery. Once he's saved by a stealth one Siegfried, and Jan I suppose, he is sheltered by an old man, then leaves that house because he wants to go fight in the war because homuncular revolution or something. The first sword arc that we see him go through is one about morality and the cruelty of humans. When our protagonists fight against Jack the Ripper, Sieg observes a cruder reality of humans, that some of them go as far as to kill children, even Jan the Holy Maiden. A point which is debatable, by the way. This scene harms him emotionally, which my partner understood as Sieg hasn't lived for long and his perspective on humans and their world can be a little more innocent and naive. I had a different perspective here, as Sieg so far has mostly seen death and cruelty until this point, with good humans being the exception to the rule.
Riot shield! I'm a pussy that use riot shield!
Oh, I'm a what do you want me to use?
Although this is no surprise as he was in the middle of a war between two factions with mages and servants, I just couldn't buy this character moment, as he shouldn't be as shocked by crap that he has already seen, with the difference being that the ones dying were children instead of homunculi. So yeah, it's up to you whether you agree with one of the perspectives we came out with, or if you had a different point of view. We would like to read it. But regardless of which interpretation is right, the following scene ruined both premises. How's that even possible? Despite being awfully shocked minutes ago, he recovers almost instantly, with no clear repercussions on him, and no, a few words near the end of the show do not count, saying, "Yeah, humans are bad stuff, but they do more good stuff than bad stuff, so I like them because reasons." Then what was the point of presenting a dilemma if there won't be any changes on the main character? We could simply skip Sieg's mental breakdown and there would be almost no difference in how the story developed, because a few lines of dialogue do not justify such a dramatic scene. If you want to witness a moral dilemma done right on the Fate franchise, the one presented in the Heaven's Feel route is better done and has a real impact on the protagonist, changing his point of view and actions for the rest of the route. I don't want to spoil it, but you should check out the movie trilogy. It is really good. Unfortunately, we are still stuck watching this, so...
Another aspect of the protagonist that I could not accept was the romance between him and Jan. There are lots of parallels to Artoria and Shiro's relationship in Fate's Stay Night, but nothing that made that couple believable was present on Fate Apocrypha. Spoilers from this point onwards for both anime adaptations, and the novel as well. Both Jan and Artoria are saber faces, of course. Both believe that they do not deserve love and they must dedicate themselves to their cause, and both made sacrifices for their beloved ones. And finally, both wanted to reunite with the MC in the afterlife. The main difference is that Shiro and Artoria had a lot of bonding between each other. You can see Shiro treating her as a human, inviting her to share with the others, make friends, and so on. He also tried hard to fight alongside her, even if that made him suffer and receive painful injuries. While it was a short period of time, around 2 weeks or so, the hardships that they overcame together, alongside their own conflicts in beliefs, made the relationship at least plausible. So what's the difference in Fate's Stay Night Electric Boogaloo? Well, here the encounters that they have are not many. Initially, Jan helped Sieg to find a new home, but her revelation skills showed that Sieg was going to fight in the near future. This of course concerned her, as she felt some degree of responsibility and guilt for involving him in a Great War. I mean, it's not her fault, but okay. Then, they meet again in another battle between both factions, where they interacted a little bit more. Well, that's an improvement. Mainly Hill pouting for seeing Sieg involved in the war. Again. Then, their next important interaction is some sort of date in the city, where you can see some romantic interest from Jen during the encounter? But why?
Keep in mind this is about their third face-to-face encounter so far, and she already fell for a main character for no discernible reason. Then they try to bait Jack the Ripper together, basically another date, where we get to know John a bit more, but they are interrupted by assassins, so nothing much happens. Finally, we have the final attack against the Red Faction, where it's shown that John loves Sieg through a series of scenes prepared by William Shakespeare himself, where John has a mental breakdown after seeing Sieg's dismembered head.
So no head?
Making her question her about to love everyone equally. By the way, from what we understand, this scene is different from the novel, as the original purpose of these hallucinations was to break Ruler mentally, by showing her the atrocities that Gilles de Rais, one of her closest followers, committed after her death. So yeah. Finally, Joan sacrifices herself, to then reunite with Sieg on the reverse side of the world, a spiritual plane of sorts in the Fate universe. This scene being an obvious parallel to the true ending of the Fate route in the original Stay Night novel, where Saber and Shiro meet in Avalon, the afterlife, after many years apart. No jokes, this is almost the entire history of interactions between our protagonists. They also show no chemistry on screen, as Jen is not very charming or interesting in this adaptation, and Sig is as boring as it gets. Despite John being recognized as a very caring, big sister type character and optimistic by most Fate fans, such traits were developed in other media such as Grand Order, a fucking gacha game, not on Fate Apocrypha to be precise. I honestly believe that Astolfo and Sieg were going to end up together or something, as Astolfo was way more affectionate with Sieg, they had good chemistry and scenes together, and they really had motivations to help each other. But no Astolfo being for you today.
Unlike other Fate projects, we have almost double the number of servants compared to the standard Holy Grail War. In theory, this can be a compelling concept, especially if you have them grouped together so they can develop tactics to play the other faction. There could be a lot of interesting strategies and interactions between the cast to compensate for the weak points of each servant, but again, it ends up just as a theory. One of the main issues is that we have 25 episodes to develop around 16 servants, not to mention masters and other side characters. There are way too many to work with so little time, so we have several characters with brief moments to shine, while others were simply tribute fodder, ignored or used to show the prowess of other servants, while also having almost half of the potential masters artificially removed from the story to make out the main antagonists a little bit more interesting. For the good ones, we believe that Astolfo alongside Mordred and her master were the best ones. They had a decent amount of screen time, we saw them bonding with other characters, and we could understand their personal conflicts and reasons to fight in the war. By far, they were the ones that felt more human and easier to connect with. Team Mordred really felt like a dad and a rebel daughter, and Astolfo was carefree and funny, understood his limits as a weak servant, but always remained heroic and proud for being a paladin of Charlie on Grand Order when.
Then we have characters with lots of screen time but with less development, or they were simply boring characters. Here we have Sieg, John, Amakusa, and Semiramis. The ones in this bunch were relevant just for the development of the story, Sieg was too plain and boring to follow, his intentions usually appeared out of nowhere, and his growth as a character is too inconsistent and spontaneous. Jen fell out of character for me as she is presented quite differently in other media. Here she is very simple, mostly serious, and cares for other people. She wants to do the right things, but her methods to achieve such good deeds have mixed results. So it's a bit hard to take her seriously, especially with the romance subplot taking a lot of her screen time. Amakusai is the antagonist of the story, but we do not see much about him until the very end, after he has already achieved his final goal. Once he obtains the Holy Grail, we get to see some of his backstory, a point in which it's already too late and there are not many reasons to care about him. Overall, I feel he wasn't appealing as there wasn't much depth or nuance to his motivations, and his speech pattern didn't help either. Semiramis is the love interest of Amakusa. As a servant, she's super powerful, but her role is mainly relegated to being a simp, literally. She is easily triggered by other servants and helps Amakusa to fulfill his wish. That's about it. Then we have everyone else. They suck. Period.
In terms of audio and visual quality, there's not much to complain about, but there's also nothing particularly praiseworthy. The animation is mostly what you would expect from anime in this genre, such as fluid visuals, with a typical decrease in art quality when characters are moved further away from the viewer, though it is worth noting that there were some scenes that look noticeably less polished compared to the rest. I'm not talking about smear frames, those shows that you usually see when you pause an animated show, where characters look deformed to say the least. Those exist to make the animation more fluid. I'm talking about entire sequences that look odd, even though they are not too distracting. Sound-wise, the whole anime is pretty good. The boss cast is mostly fitting for the show, although Jan and Sig are quite boring at times for being the main characters. The music is quite a treat in general, not much to add. My main gripe is the sound effects. Most of them aren't annoying or anything, just generic and plain. Except for the bass boost that they decide to use to show impact. I felt like Dio just came over and started using his stand whenever a heavy blow was shown. That's mostly everything that there's to cover about the technical aspects of the show. Or it would be if we decided to ignore episode 22.
Hello and welcome back. This is the topical discussion on the Morning Breeze on NBS Television. My name is Simon Kagwanjala, and well, we're also weighing in on the raging debate.
Episode 22.
This is easily the most discussed episode of Apocrypha, and for good reason, as its animation deviates greatly from the rest of the series. Being mostly battle-centric, this episode is handed over to a different team of animators than the rest of the series, giving the scenes a more raw feel, with good use of visual effects and explosions that I wasn't really into. Don't get me wrong, I can see the work done behind the scenes by the team, and it's a nice display of Sakuga. It just doesn't fit in with the rest of Apocrypha. There's a dissonance between the softer style of the 21 preceding episodes and the raw energy from 22, to the point that it can make it feel very sloppy at times. The off-model shots don't mesh well with more detailed scenes from early on, and the extremely high energy of the fight leaves very little room for processing what's happening on screen, especially considering that we don't know much about either brawler's skill set going in. Another detail, albeit smaller in comparison, is the locale of the Karna vs Siegfried. This whole sequence happens atop the Hanging Gardens of Semiramis, but the explosions and destruction are more akin to the wastelands in Dragon Ball of the empty plains where tokusatsu fights are filmed. I know there's a lot of people who adore this episode. I've seen various threads and posts about it. The thing is, this episode works way better when viewed in a vacuum. A random GIF posted here and there, a clip appearing in a recommended one day, or simply watching it on its own, separate from the rest of the series, just to see what all the fuss is about. I actually enjoyed the episode way more when rewatching it for the purpose of this video, as it was harder to make comparisons in my mind without arriving straight from episode 21. But I feel the major issues still stand, mostly the pacing of the fight and the locations of it. I love Sakuga, but I also want to see it when it's appropriate. Okay, we want to watch something else. Or maybe not. Anyway, here's the rating.
Storytelling. It is what you would expect from a fake product. Mages and heroic spirits fighting each other for the Holy Grail, but now you have them separated by factions and they work together in a team deathmatch rather than a free-for-all. Sounds super dumb if you write it down, but it is what it is. When it comes to rhythm and story arcs, it is a hit or miss. Sieg's story is boring, while Mordred and his master form a more enjoyable and believable bond. Then we have the entire Red faction led by Amakusai, who are mostly bland with no clear intentions aside from the leader seeking salvation for humanity near the end, but then, in the same group, Achilles had interesting backstories with other characters. On the worst part, we have characters like Astolfo's master, Spartacus, and Abikabron, who had little screen time and had little to no development. There are good and bad things in Apocrypha's story, most of them are bad. 2 out of 5 here because a lot of story arcs were rushed and unfulfilling. Characters. With so many to work with, the anime did not have enough time, or they didn't try hard enough, you choose, to develop every character correctly. Similar to the story, we have interesting characters. Then we have others who existed for 1 or 2 episodes then fade into obscurity. The protagonists were not memorable, and we have to cheer for them because they were the main characters of the story. Side characters are a hit or miss as well. Astolfo was very whimsical and funny. Then we have Siegfried, who looked like a strong character who had issues with his master and his own past, to then die in the first 2 episodes. Mordred was the bro of the show, with badass moments while fighting her own inner demons. Most of the masters were, well, they appear on the wiki. Well, aside from the 2 siblings who had the most amount of screen time, so that could explain me cheering for them a little bit. The remaining ones appeared a lot of the beginning of the show, but then died or simply faded away. Masters from the Red faction were eliminated artificially to reduce the number of characters, so we only had Jack and Mordred's masters to work with. Finally, some characters were not properly characterized, namely Jan and Karna. I honestly felt like they were out of character most of the time, especially if you have seen them in other media. They were developed further in post-Apocrypha media, but characters like Artoria and Tamamo are written consistently where they appear, whereas the ones in Apocrypha don't. We prefer quality over quantity, so we will give this one a 3 out of 5 because at least some characters were charming enough to follow their stories, even if there were not many worth following. Production value. Aside from episode 22 with its unique art style, the visuals are what you would expect from a modern anime. Sometimes characters look bad from afar, sometimes even close. Other times there was not much attention to detail as well. There were a few fighting scenes where the animation looked bad, in sequence. Not just a few hand-picked frames, but those were not that distracting. What was distracting was the sound effect, which was used in almost every single episode. It was funny the first 5 times, then it became super annoying and distracting for the experience. Voices were mostly okay, with good voice actors who portrayed the emotions correctly, but I still find Amakusa boring as hell. Maybe it's just me though. We'll give this one a 3 out of 5. Not very impressive, but nothing too shabby. Whether you find episode 22 good or bad as a whole, it's up to you. Enjoyment. This one is difficult to answer. A lot of people like it, and a lot of people didn't. We initially had a decent time with this one, then it got kind of slow and messy due to the awkward pace and forced interaction between the characters, but the final episodes were competent enough to keep us entertained. It isn't a full-fledged experience by any means, but we would say that it is okay. We will assess this one with a 3 or 5 because it wasn't dreadful or anything. But the disappointment
is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
Well, Fate Apocrypha presented an interesting take on the Grail War, with a broad cast of characters and factions against each other. The concept wasn't worked to its fullest. It is a bit infuriating that it ended as it is right now, being one of the few Fate projects that works mostly on its own, can make it a good option for newcomers, because missing a few references isn't such a big deal. That, of course, assuming that Apocrypha is worth watching, which it isn't. The addition of the ruler class did not make much difference aside from adding a marketable servant to the cast. They also doubled the number of characters compared to other Fate works, but had the same runtime of 24-25 episodes, leading to undeveloped characters or simply expendable ones. The soundtrack was very competent, and most of the voice actors did a very good job. The visuals were okay for the most part, but with clear flaws in several scenes. Overall, I would not say that Fate Apocrypha is a bad anime. It's mostly a disappointing experience, with a lot of wasted potential. You can judge whether this is better or worse than being tagged as bad, but Fate Apocrypha is certainly one of the most capable works in the franchise. Watch it only if you have spare time, or if you're exploring further into Fate. Or if you want to see Astolfo fooling around. He's certainly the best boy.